Hi, welcome to Tech Takeaways, the podcast taking technology's biggest chunks, chunking them down into smaller chunks, and then feeding them up to you for easy digestion. Let's start again with that.
Oh, no, I thought it was great. Do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go with that. We're going to keep this edit in, I think.
Okay. I'm your host, Jason Fitzgerald, and I'm joined, as ever, by Paul Stringfellow. And in this week, we have a special guest, Peter Goodwin from Efficient IP. Welcome.
Hi, Jason.
So, Peter, could you tell us about yourself, what you do over at Efficient IP?
So I work for Efficient IP. We're a DDI company, which I'm sure we'll come on to very shortly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I look after the pre-sales team for Northern Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India.
Okay.
And that's the guys that understand what the product does and can articulate it.
Okay, good stuff. So when we're talking DDI, what are we talking about?
So, yeah, it's one of those annoying acronyms. So DDI.
It's not someone's direct
acronym.
dial, is it, for their phone?
No, so although someone has interviewed and thought it was, and that didn't end well. So it's DNS, DHCP, and then IP address management.
Okay, yeah.
And typically those three things form part of the core network services that every network relies on. You know, no one remembers what IP addresses are. So when you want to access a website, your browser will issue a DNS request for the name that you've put in, and that will be resolved down to an IP address with the use of DNS. DHCP is you get an IP address when you log on to a net, or when you attach to a network, and you get it dynamically if there's enough available IP addresses. And that then allows you to connect into the network. IP address management is just making sense of what IPs, subnets, and networks you've got within your network, and ideally planning for the future using a tool.
Yeah, so I think that when I'm looking at DNS and DHCP, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people don't really appreciate that they are happening because they are so fundamental to network operation, isn't it? You know, people will plug in their router, plug in their firewall. Maybe they've got a larger network with servers on, and these things just happen, you know, in the background kind of thing. So I think it's probably taken as a given that those things just work. Myself and Paul, having worked together for a long time now, we've got a common phrase, which is "it's always DNS."
Because it is.
Which is when we say "it's always DNS," what we mean is when something's broken, it's likely going to be DNS. You know, it's that kind of fundamental.
Again, we've even done an episode on our favourite topic being DNS and DNS security. You know, and I think you know, and these are the kind of things that start to fit in with, I think, what Peter's introducing here. That idea of bringing together all these kind of almost fundamental level components of communications across your network. You know, so we need IP addresses, we need DNS so that we can resolve an IP address. Well, I mean, if we want to really get down to it, there's a MAC address somewhere that resolves to an IP address that resolves to a name, so humans can kind of deal with names. But as you know, we were talking before we started to record about, you know, and I think it's a really interesting start point is because we can talk about DDI, you know, and it's easy for people to talk to vendors like Efficient IP and assume that you're just going to come in and say, well, everybody must have to have DDI. But it was interesting, you were saying to me before that actually it's not something that necessarily everybody wants. So what's kind of where should people start to think about DDI?
I mean, the kind of the life cycle I always start with is if you've got two guys and you set a podcast studio up, right? When you first started, you might have had a printer somewhere to print invoice and stuff out. So you probably had a piece of paper on the fridge with the IP address of the printer, probably the Wi-Fi code as well, just on the off chance. And that's fine. You don't need DDI. Your router's doing it for you. Yeah. So the thing that the ISP gives you to connect up gives you the DHCP leases for whatever you're running internally. It has a list of the IPs. The printer you might have put in as a static. That's IP address management in its base form. The router's doing it. You don't get involved. And it also does the DNS. That's where your queries start. But then you start to get a bit bigger, and maybe you get to like couple of hundred employees. And it's starting to get a little bit too complex for a piece of paper on a fridge. So you go to the next step, which is I'll get a spreadsheet to do it. Because you can put all the validation rules on data, you can put the subnets in, you can put all the metadata along the way.
And who doesn't run their business on a spreadsheet? I mean, you know.
Yeah. But it's free and Excel's fantastic for it.
Yeah.
And that works to a point. And then what you end up seeing is one of three things happens. Either the network becomes too complex. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because you've got cloud involved, you've got virtualization on-premise. It could just be that you've got loads of different bits all over the place. And it's just a little bit too cumbersome to use a single spreadsheet. And you can't guarantee that that data is actually what's in the network because the two don't meet. It could be because you just need the security. Security have decided that you have to have an accurate asset list of what's in the network, and you don't know about it. So there's a number of things that come up. It's either size, complexity, or there's a security need. That's when companies start to look at a more commercial offering. And there are some open source stuff that they might start with, go from an Excel spreadsheet to an open source platform, and then do commercial later.
If somebody's watching this, and let's hope somebody is, because it's just us three talking to each other if it is. But if somebody's watching this then and are thinking, well, what does too much complexity look like, and where might I start to see value in a DDI solution? And I don't expect you to say, well, a company that looks like this, but is there any pointers that you might have for somebody? Generally,
if there's a company that's of 100 to 200 employees, they're probably not going to look at a commercial offering because there's a cost associated with it. But then you get some hospitals where it is mission critical, right? If the operating theatres of today absolutely need core network services because all the devices in the operating theatre rely on IP networks. So if DNS is down, they can't do operations. That's life-threatening to some extent. So it can be small organizations do have a need for it. It tends to be kind of 400 or 500 employees or above where it starts becoming relevant. The bigger organizations, absolutely. But the complexity you see in some people's networks where they've got multiple sites, they've got multiple cloud instances, plus on-premise virtualization, and they want to know where things are. And a spreadsheet doesn't talk to the routers and switches, so it can't discover what's in the network. Spreadsheet doesn't talk to Azure or AWS to find out what you've got in the different subscriptions you've got. And it doesn't talk to DNS, so you can't automate really anything with a spreadsheet. When that starts to be too much effort and things aren't accurate, companies then need to start looking at what they do. Like the NIS2 thing that's come out, a load more verticals now have to start doing reporting on what they've got in their networks. If they're running a spreadsheet, they've got an idea. They don't have a vision of reality, so they need to get that kind of information.
I think that's the one for me, the visibility. If we look at spreadsheets, and a lot of our customers do still work on the spreadsheets, it's devices that they know about, that they've installed, that they found. It's not necessarily every device that's on the network. So there's a cybersecurity element to this as well.
Yep.
The greater the visibility in your network, if you can see the devices that are on your network, what they're doing, and maybe build up some patterns on that massively improves cybersecurity. You could start to ask questions like, why is this random device in this network? We didn't add it. What is it? It could be, a random device is being added into the network and is making DNS calls. That would fly under the radar without the visibility that, like a DDI platform would add. I'm correct in saying that, aren't I? Yeah.
I mean, it's a truism, I think, that in most companies, no one really looks at what's going on the internal DNS side. They look at the queries that are going to leave the network, because you can buy commercial threat feeds that have a lot of indicators of compromise in, and you can run those at the DNS level. It's a great thing. It's the first thing in any transaction on the network generally.
Right,
so it's a good control point. But if it's not a known threat actor, but it's an internal name, no one cares. DNS servers would just, because they're authoritative for that data, they'll just answer. It doesn't matter who you are on an internal network. Once you're in, if you make a DNS query, the odds are it's going to get answered internally.
Yeah, so that's one of the first things that an attacker will do in a network, isn't it? They'll start to build out, okay, what does this network look like? What devices are on it? What version of operating systems are they running? What version of applications are they running? Can I do any DNS queries? Let's build it up. And DNS is used for that. As well.
The reconnaissance comes in a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're making a great point. In fact, such a good point. I feel that we should dedicate an episode.
We should do an episode on that.
DNS security.
Yeah.
So stay tuned next week. So before we talk more about DNS security next week, when we'll all be dressed the same, I'm just interested because we're talking about DDI as a platform.
Yeah.
So and everything we talked about actually separately is managing DNS, managing IP. And managing DHCP. So we can do each of those things individually. What's the value of looking at this as a platform? Is there gaps in doing these kind of things individually? Obviously, there's operational overhead, etc. But where's the value of bringing these things together into a single solution?
So there's a couple of things really. One, you can get efficiencies by automating IPAM to DNS to DHCP. So that if someone wants an IP address, typically they're going to want a name to go with it, or they have a name to go with it. So it's always nice to be able to create the DNS name at the same time as assigning an IP address. And if you think of it as a triangle with IPAM, DNS, DHCP, if you make a change in any one of the three, it normally affects at least one of the other two. So that is a core thing, is having that automation within the platform. But it's not just about DDI in itself, because more and more you start to see people trying to leverage the integrations from one platform to another. And it's just, everyone spends a lot of money on all these platforms, whether it's a next-gen firewall, whether it's a firewall management platform, whether it's an IDS, IP, whatever it is, they spend money on it. And they put a lot of investment in, time and effort to deploy them. But they don't always talk to each other. But the more they do, the more value you get from the collective solution rather than just the individual silos. So if you're looking at orchestration, where you want to be able to spin up applications and services quickly, right, you can normally pick an image to spin up, or you can go to a catalog and say what you want. It needs an IP address to get on the network, and it probably needs a name, because no one's going to just go to the IP address. So having that automation where the orchestration platform talks to the IPAM platform, creates the DNS name and gets the IP address, so that when it does spin it up, it's instantly accessible, means that you can get services running a lot quicker and you're less reliant on those manual processes. So that kind of helps. If you've got firewall management, there's a number of vendors that we integrate with, but just to pick Extreme, right? So from the Extreme system, you can push data into IPAM from Extreme. You can pull information out from IPAM. So you get more rich information within IP address management. And that should be the single source of truth for the networks. But then when a DNS event occurs on the security side, if we flag a query up as anomalous, we can send the data through to Extreme and they can start blocking that IP address everywhere in the network, not just at the DNS server that picked it up. So it's just a good centralized point to start integrating a lot of different platforms and systems so that you increase the value you get out of that solution.
And that word integration, I think, is really important in this kind of stuff, because I think one of the fears that people have when they listen to a vendor, or people like me and Jason talking about new technologies, the first thing they think, I've got to buy something else, or I've got to rip out a bunch of stuff and replace it. But a lot of this is about orchestrating kind of current solutions to improve that management, join together those kind of what are currently kind of disparate things almost.
Yeah.
Is that where the value sits in? You're not looking to replace current DNS DHCP. You're looking at how do we pull all this together. And
the first step that a lot of places do, and if we're honest about it, Microsoft is the biggest DDI vendor on the planet. They just give it away.
Yeah.
And it runs on Active Directory, and Active Directory won't run without it. So that's why they do it. But actually, if you move DNS and DHCP off an Active Directory server, that server is going to run Active Directory a lot better. And you only have to patch Active Directory, not the DNS and the DHCP as well. So normally, the first thing that a customer would look at is managing the Microsoft DNS DHCP from a central place to get the visibility. Yeah. You don't really get as much control and integration when you're managing Microsoft, but it's normally a first step. And then the DNS and the DHCP, they can migrate as and when they need. Once everything's on an efficient IP platform, so if we're running DNS and IPAM and DHCP, then you can start to leverage all the integrations and you get a much more cohesive security solution.
So I suppose for people watching, just kind of before we wrap up, we like to give some people some takeaways. So what would be, so somebody's listening to this and thinking, well, do I need DDI? Is that something, I know I kind of asked you before about what does a DDI customer look like? But yeah. I suppose kind of in summary, if somebody's considering DDI, what should they be thinking about? What's the challenge they've got right now where they should be coming to talk to a vendor like you?
I mean, Jason nailed it with visibility for the first one, is if you've got a lot of cloud environments that you're using, that your different departments have got different accounts or whatever, but understanding all the infrastructure in the cloud, in the physical network, maybe on-premise. If you've got a mixture of network topologies, just getting it in one place in IPAM so you can understand it, and then discovering it. So discovering the virtual, discovering the physical, so that you've got a single source of truth and visibility. That's probably the first thing. And then it comes down to, do you want to start layering on things like DNS security? Do you want to try and be a bit more sustainable by running the services on smaller spec machines than you did when you were using open source stuff? All those kind of things come in. But the visibility is one of the key ones.
You nailed it, Jace.
I know. Here for a reason.
Yeah.
So
with no sleep.
If anyone wants to find out more, how can they do it? Where's the best place for them to go next?
Well, you can either start with our website,
okay, which is
www.efficientip.com.
Okay.
And we have a DNS server just to resolve that name.
Okay, great.
Most of our, all of our business is done through channel partners around the world. So it depends on what channel partners as a customer you would use. You can approach us that way, but directly through the website. There are forms on there. If anyone's interested, we'll get back to them.
That's great.
Come ask Jace because he nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Check out the website. You can come to ourselves, myself, Paul. Let us know. Peter, thanks very much for that. That's very informative. That's great. So as we wrap up this episode, we say thanks for listening. If you've not yet subscribed and you're watching on YouTube, there's a little button just below. Hit that subscribe button. Don't miss the next episodes. And if you like to listen to the podcast, we're available everywhere you get podcasts. Just hit subscribe. So we'll catch you next week.